And, oh, there we go. Thanks. All right, perfect. So we're going to, that makes sense given where you work. Tima, yes, I got it, because you guys were an early adopter with that. All right, I'm going to get cracking here. Morning, Baljeet. Morning, Craig. So today's class is the combined class, so there's no homework for today. I know there was a confusing email sent out. I apologize for that. And we're just now we have the CFP group and the QAFP group. Our agenda for today, we actually have a guest speaker, an exciting guest speaker to get us started this morning. And this is in response to something that had come up as a question earlier. And if I remember correctly, Leanne, I have this right. Leanne, it's you that introduced us to Suzanne, isn't it? I believe that's true, Leanne. All right. So thanks very much for that. And Suzanne's going to talk, you'll see her just momentarily here. Suzanne's going to talk about coaching. This was a question that came up in class, and I sort of gave a broad answer, a very general answer. And then Leanne said, hey, if you want somebody to help out with that, here's this person I know should be able to help you out. And I thought, yeah, that's a really good opportunity. Suzanne and I had a good conversation about 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, about how this would look. And I looked through her PowerPoint deck yesterday. It looks really good. I think she understands the problem here. So appreciate that. Once Suzanne is done, I have 4 multiple choice questions in today's slide deck. So we're going to work through 2 of those questions. Then we're going to talk about time management, and then 2 more questions, and then on to defined benefit. We'll see how far we get by 4 hours from now. Now, before I hand the baton over to Suzanne, are there any pressing questions? And welcome to the class, Michelle. Good to have you here. Thanks. Any pressing questions before we get cracking? Okay, so I'm just going to make you, I'm not sure how this is going to work with a slide deck, Suzanne, but I'm going to make you a co-host just so you have some degree of control. I would say so, Kevin. Sorry, can people just say, I can hear you, Jason, or something to that effect? That would be perfect. Thanks so much. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, everybody. That's good. So, I don't know what's going on for Kevin. All right. So, Suzanne, I've got your slide deck loaded up. Maybe you can just yell at me when you want me to go to the next slide or launch your poll.
That's perfect. It will be, we should be able to move through it fairly quickly.
Yeah, I'm not fussed. However it goes, it's good. So, all right. Oh, and sorry, yes, this is a good point. Well, not everybody's on VPN, but yes, if you're on VPN, close out your VPN. It makes for a better experience. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Suzanne. Suzanne, she's going to introduce herself as well, but she is actually formerly a financial planner herself, and now is a professional coach. And she's going to talk about that a little bit more here. So let's give Suzanne a warm virtual round of applause. Thanks, Suzanne. And go ahead.
Thank you so much for being here. Certainly when Leanne reached out to me and said, hey, was this something, Suzanne, that you might be interested in? I jumped at it for 2 reasons. One, I think the first one is really just something that was close to my heart, right? I know the amount of stress that can come from balancing multiple pieces of your life, right? So a very robust practice along with studying, along with things at home. So certainly now that I have the knowledge and the expertise that I have within coaching, I am very, very passionate about sharing that, as Jason will attest to on our phone call earlier. So I'm super excited to be here. So why don't we dive in? I do anticipate this will take us, 20 to 30 minutes really to work through. Please certainly, be as interactive as you would like to be. Coaching is such an individual process that, the more questions you ask, the better experience that you will have. So please feel free to ask me questions. I have saved some time at the end, certainly as well for that as well. So Jason, if we can just move to that first slide, that would be great. So the first piece that I really want to chat with you about is I really want you to begin to think and isolate, what exactly am I stressed about? You know, I think we use this word often, you know, I'm so stressed out. I've heard my kids say it, you know, I've said it multiple times, but I really want you to think in relation to your time studying for the CFP, what exactly is your source of stress? So along the side there, I have 4 options. The first one is actually managing my time effectively in order to study and actually be able to digest the content. The next one is, you know, this fear impact certainly of, well, what if I'm not successful? Like, what will that actually look like for my career? The third one is, you know, you do have concerns and you are experiencing stress around whether or not the content will be too challenging for you. And then the last one is certainly reputational risk. So what would my peers think? What would my clients think if I'm not a successful candidate for the CFP? So Jason and I did a little bit of a poll that I would ask if each of you, if we could put that poll up. Jason, if you could please just select what your primary source of stress is related to studying for the CFP. Okay, and as these are coming in, you know, I'm not surprised to see that we have individuals in each one of those areas, right? As I said, we're all in very different spots, certainly I'm sure in your careers as well as what you're balancing already at home. So we've just got a few more people left to vote. And then once that comes through, this poll will make a little bit more sense later, and I will tie it into your personal situation with some takeaways that you can do. So, okay, so it looks like everyone has actually answered. So 50% of you are talking about managing your time, which Jason, I think I saw earlier is on time management is one of the things that you're going to be talking about. So that's excellent.
Just to be clear though, Suzanne, when I talk about time management, I'm talking about in a constrict, like during the exam. So you're right, we're talking about that, but as an exam technique issue, not as a like 3 months of time management or 5 months of time management. So that's a big difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a fairly effective strategy that I will share with everyone near the end of the presentation. So I do want to make sure that if, you know, because you're taking the time, you know, the next 30 minutes to spend with me, it's really important for me that you do have some takeaways that you can implement right away. So time management certainly is a big one. That was one that, I'll be honest, I struggled with as a planner as well, right? It is sometimes can be a very reactive business when we have clients reaching out to us out of the blue. So impact to your career should you not be successful, around 20% of you there, concerned that the content is too challenging, and reputational risk at about 13%. So that is, I'm happy that you're all able to isolate that. So certainly, Jason, if we can go on to the next slide. So Jason did mention a little bit earlier, I am actually an accredited life and success coach. So I've taken some additional accreditation because coming out of financial planning, as was mentioned earlier, education is something that's incredibly important to me. And I think we all need to be working with, you know, a toolkit that we can add value to our clients with. As part of that toolkit, I've gone through and I have become a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, which focuses quite heavily on how we think and being able to rework some of those thought patterns that are very, very much ingrained in all of us that perhaps are actually impeding us in achieving our goals. So prior to coaching, I did spend 18 years within the Canadian banking, you know, system, I guess we want to call it that. And certainly I loved it. I loved being a financial planner, but as my career went along, what I was finding was I was becoming more and more excited about working through the non-numbers piece with my clients. So I've always loved really getting to the root cause of why someone is doing something, a certain behavior. And that's what effectively has led me over to coaching. So now as a coach, I still work through goal setting, I still work through time management techniques, but on a very much a deeper level, I'm able to get to the root source of why my clients are actually not able to achieve success in certain areas. And that's by using my neurolinguistic programming um, skills. So that's something I will talk to you a little bit about early or a little bit later in our presentation. So Jason, if we can just move to that next slide. I think it's really important here for us just to have a recap on what is stress. It's a word that certainly we use a lot, but we really probably don't think too much about what it actually means. And stress honestly is a physiological and emotional response to a perceived threat. Now, when we're talking about stress that you're experiencing as you study for your CFP, that's not a physical threat, but it is really important to be aware of some of the, the physical signs that may come up, that are there to, you should be aware of them because it is your body trying to tell you something that, hey, I'm getting close to being on overload. So signs that you should be looking for really can be, the outward ones like anxiety, irritability, lack of focus, whether it's when you're studying or just in general, and that feeling of being overwhelmed. Physical symptoms may show up in the form of headaches. Are you getting more and more headaches? When you think about studying or, writing your exam, do you find your heart rate is moving higher? Do you get nauseous? Some of my clients, when they're super stressed, will say, Suzanne, I've got, heartburn. I've never had heartburn in my life, and here it is showing up in this way. And another way, certainly from a prolonged stress, you may find that you're more susceptible to some cold and other physical ailments. Is this ringing true for anyone on the call right now? Are you beginning to experience any of these types of emotional or physiological? Yeah, I'm starting to seeing that coming through. And what we want to get to the point of near the end of this presentation is, now that you've begun to identify what's my source of stress, so what is that threat, you'll be in a much better position that you can begin to address it, right? And part of coaching is not just telling you what you need to do. It's helping you actually self-discover and understand what is my source of stress, and then go through and come up with our action plans and strategies. So when I was speaking with Jason a couple of weeks ago and we were coming up with, what this would look like, we decided to go with more of a case study just to illustrate how coaching can actually help bridge this gap. So we will look at that, but before we do that, I do want to move to the next slide and just talk a little bit about how we're wired. And sometimes my clients find this really interesting that, largely the way that our minds work, we're wired the same way as what our ancestors were thousands of years ago, right? And it really is around self-preservation. So the threats that we're experiencing now obviously are not the same as what our ancestors were experiencing, thousands of years ago, when it was very much a physical threat that was heavily prevalent. That being said, though, our subconscious minds, oh, it looks like Lorna can't hear anything. Our subconscious minds certainly have developed in such a way to help us preserve energy in case we do have to flight. And the way that they do that is oh, sorry, I'll stop reading at the bottom. The way that they actually do that is we do come up with shortcuts and patterns in how we process information. So what our minds do, right? Think about the thousands of pieces of information that you are exposed to every day, right? And if your mind had to go through and actually address every single one of those, you would be exhausted by 10 o'clock in the morning, right? You would have totally burnt through your entire day's worth of energy. So what our mind does is it comes up with shortcuts. And as information is coming through to us, it's either distorting that information to match what our view of the world already is and what we think about ourselves. It's generalizing it, so just filing it away to use later and filtering through that way for us, or it's completely deleting it. Where this becomes important for us is, think about the number of times you've made a split-second decision about someone that you meet, right? So all of a sudden you meet this new person, you've never met them before, but they remind you of someone, and you actually have an immediate response to them, sometimes really good and sometimes not so great because of maybe your experience with someone previously in your past. So our mind is set up to really help us conserve energy by having these shortcuts. Another really important thing to understand is change. So anytime we try and implement change is a scary thing for your subconscious mind, because it involves an unknown, and your subconscious mind doesn't know how to keep you safe necessarily from this unknown. So quite often with my clients, what I see is individuals repeating patterns of behavior over and over and over again. Introducing tools like, or not tools, but procrastination has always been an issue for them. These types of behaviors and patterns are so ingrained in us that you don't even realize you're doing them until after the fact when you go back and revisit. So I won't go too much more into our subconscious mind because I can get lost in here for a while, and I do want to make sure we can move to the other pieces. So Jason, if you don't mind moving to that next slide. Let's roll through and look at the case study. So this is actually not a client that I've worked with, but this would be the type of client that would come to me for coaching. So a well-tenured financial professional whose organization has actually put in place a completion date to successfully complete their CFP as part of their continued employment. So they also have already been currently managing a very robust book of clients on a full-time basis. They have family obligations that they're trying to balance along with working full-time as well as their studying. The key here is even prior to embarking on their CFP, they always felt there was really never enough time in the day or even in the week to accomplish everything that they feel they should be doing. And it was leaving them to feel completely overwhelmed. So with that overwhelmed feeling, what was happening is they currently find themselves actually having difficulty concentrating when they do set aside time to study. They're seeing their performance at work impacted, and certainly a lot more frustration taking place at home. When I would initially meet with a client like this who's balancing so many multiple potential sources of the threat, is really to sit down and have them do some self-discovery about which one of those pieces is the most worrisome for them. Because with coaching, it's really important to understand my own bias cannot creep in to what I think the client potentially is most worried about. So if we move to the next slide, this is really where we can start to see how would a coach or how would coaching actually address this. And there's two sides that we would work through, that I would work through with a client. The first one is I actually want to be able to provide them with some immediate relief, right? And it's something that I will come out and just mention now is that coaching is not therapy. I am not a mental health professional. If at any point in time, a client that I'm working with we uncover that the source of their stress is actually a past trauma, or they are having some deep, deep psychological breaks, it is not a coach that they should be dealing with. They should really be dealing with a mental health professional like a psychologist or a psychotherapist. That's really, really important to understand. Coaching is really, my role is to guide you through this process, to provide you with some, tasks that you can actually move forward with. But I am not there to address any mental health aspects of that relationship. So when I look at providing, helping this individual with some immediate release to the stress that they're experiencing, the first thing we're going to start to do is actually focus on some really basic self-care. And it's something that, I'll be honest, I don't know with everyone on the call, but it used to be something that when I was a planner got pushed off a lot, right? I mean, I would have days where you'd come into the office at 8:30 and it would be 2:00 and you realize you haven't drank any water all day. That actually does put a stress on your body that you're not even aware of. So a way that we can help mitigate and reduce some of those stresses is by ensuring that you're really well hydrated. Even mild dehydration can actually impact our thought processes and recall, right? So that's a really easy thing. Is I would encourage this client to begin to drink lots of water. I would encourage them, if they're not already moving their body each and every day, to get out and do something, whether it's walking, whether it's stretching, yoga. It doesn't have to be a high intensity workout, but it is really, really important to get out there and move your body and help your body release some of these feel good, chemicals that our brains produce. The next thing that I would really look to do with this client is help them uncover and identify what actually is the stress for them. So remember, if we go back to the beginning of this presentation, I asked you guys to look at, what part of the CFP and getting ready for the CFP is stressing you out, because that's the process that we have to go to first, right? If someone says to me, I'm stressed about the reputational risk of this, my immediate thing that I'm not going to go to is maybe around time management. We need to address first the root cause of that stress. What I would encourage them to do is we would actually focus a lot on the use of visualizations and positive affirmations. And the reason is, if you have a stress that, for instance, I'm not going to be able to complete this exam, right? I don't feel that I'm able to cover off the content. We actually are able to use visualizations to help retrain your mind to see the outcome that you want to achieve, which is successfully completing the CFP. And the reason that I focus on visualizations is when your mind begins to focus on what you want to achieve, you actually, there's a part of your brain called the reticular activating system, which is at the base of your spine there where it connects. And its job is to actually filter that information. So the information that you're going to distort, delete, and generalize. And what this filter is based on is what you actually believe. So through visualizations, if you begin to believe that I am intelligent enough to complete this exam, or if you begin to visualize and believe that there is enough time in my day for me to study and spend time with my family and still be successful at work, that's what your RSA is actually going to begin to filter for you. And your mind is going to be able to see those situations that will help to support that outcome. Visualizations is something that pro athletes use. Jason and I talked a lot about, how coaching is so apparent, certainly when it comes to sport, but less apparent, in our lives in general. And pro athletes use visualizations constantly. It's something that your mind, quite honestly, can't differentiate sometimes between a visualization and what's real. So that's a way that we can help to really support rewiring of your brain. On a more task-focused side, the other piece that we really want to look at is developing a plan and a structure to your day that actually supports you in being successful for your CFP. So I know there were a lot of people, 50% of the individuals on here had said time management and balancing that time is a really tricky one, right? What I do with clients or my clients is I actually encourage them to do something that I call a brain dump. And all that is, typically on a Sunday, Monday, whatever works for best for you. Yes, for sure. Certainly whatever works best for you is sit down and just brainstorm. What is absolutely every single thing I need to accomplish this week coming up? Put in your work, put in your family obligations, put in your obligations for your CFP, and get it all out onto a piece of paper or several pieces of paper, depending on how robust your week is going to be. From there, I encourage you to actually prioritize what needs to be done. And once you prioritize that list, whether it's a list of 10 things or it's a list of 30 things, you begin to actually take what's on that list and plug it directly into your calendar. So if you've set it to priority, so setting for your CFP is a priority, and you realize your goal is to do it for 1 hour a day, you plug that in first, and everything else will follow through. So that is something that I encourage all of my clients to do, this brain dump process once a week. It works exceptionally well. And I'll be honest, even in my own life, I use this. So I balance a business. Actually, I have 2 businesses. I balance a husband who has a very robust career and travels for work. I have a child that plays, high level rep hockey as well as rep lacrosse, and another child that plays rep lacrosse. We're really busy, right? And before I was doing this, I was completely overwhelmed, right? I would start my day and be like, okay, today's the day I'm going to get organized and everything's going to be great. And then because I didn't have a plan, something would just come in that would completely derail me. For those of you who are thinking, Suzanne, I don't have time to spend an hour a week or an hour and a half a week on this, I'm already feeling time crunched, I want to just leave you with the statistic that for every 10 minutes you spend planning, you likely are going to save an hour somewhere else in your day, right? So if you think you don't have the time, it is 1,000% why you should be trying this process. Another thing that I would encourage this individual, right? So this client in our case study to really focus on is merely what's within their control, right? So take it back and peel back and say, what is actually within my control? And that's what you should be focusing on. You can't focus on the fact that COVID hit and all of a sudden, exam dates have changed. That is completely without your control. What is within your control is setting aside the time required to actually learn the content, right? So that is something that as you take back control and as you become more and more proactive and less reactive to what's happening around you, that actually reduces your stress, right? The last piece, and this ties back in with the visualizations, I would be encouraging this client to really focus on the positive outcome that they want to achieve. If you go back and think about the source of what you isolated for your stress, whether it be the reputational risk, whether it be not having enough time, whether it be not understanding content, or certainly the work-life balance piece, I really want you to think, how many times throughout the day do you focus on that negative outcome? Because what you focus on, as I said earlier, is what your mind will think you want to achieve. And it will put those situations in place for you, right? So I don't know if anyone's ever woken up one day and thought, today's going to be a really crappy day. And what happens is as your day moves forward, things start to snowball. And, you hit every red light on your way to work. You spill coffee on your white shirt. You have 2 clients canceled. The sale didn't come through. Unknowingly, you have put it put your mind on the track to think that's how your day is going to go. And sure enough, that's how your day will go. So as you begin to notice that you're thinking these negative thoughts of not being smart enough, not having enough time, I really want you to pause, and I want you to rethink that and come up with the opposite of that, right? So if you're thinking you don't have enough time, what I would encourage you to really focus on and change your verbiage around is, I have all the time I need in order to focus. And I know right now that's something that a lot of you are probably sitting back and going, Suzanne, I don't have the time. But if you keep telling yourself you don't, that is the outcome that is going to come to fruition. Yes, right. So Jason just said, he stopped saying he was so busy, and that's made a huge difference. It's true. So when I stop saying, if I walk around all the time and I go, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed. Well, guess what? My mind's going to go, Suzanne must really want to be stressed. So I'm going to support her in that, because that's one of the presuppositions of how our subconscious mind works. But if I walk around and go, you know what? Today's going to be an amazing day. I'm going to take control of my day. I have enough time over the course of my day to complete everything I need to complete. Those are the outcomes that you're going to see more and more in your life. I've seen some people sort of popping up questions as we go. I'm just going to pause here for a moment. Is there anything that someone would like to ask or have me clarify with this so far in this presentation?
I'll throw something in here, Suzanne. So you talk about this, and I agree with this, focus on visualizations and so forth. On, I think, day one of class, we went through a point that I had. Oh, and Olu's got a question here too, Suzanne. I don't know if you fall in the chat, but I give this presentation about why students fail the exam, right? And I really do it as to say, what can you address now that would prevent you from ending up in that failing situation? Do you think I'm phrasing that wrong? Do you think that what I'm trying to do is give people the tools to right now put in place so that they don't have that outcome, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would rephrase your verbiage a little bit, right? And I would say, what do successful candidates do in order to pass the exam? Again, because it's focusing on those positive behaviors, right? If we're focusing on the aspect of failing, you are implanting that subconscious seed that, oh my gosh, I could fail, right? Which is probably something that, individuals are already a little bit concerned about as they embark on this. So, yeah, I would encourage you to focus more on what do successful candidates do differently so that they are successful in passing the CFP.
I guess one of the other things that I do that maybe fits in that camp is I talk about the fact that you almost have to give yourself, and I don't know, again, if this is accurate, but I say you have to give yourself permission to fail the exam. That is, people are going to fail this exam. This is, statistically, it's an impossibility. Now, maybe all 51 people on this call pass the exam. That's not impossible, right? I know every individual is capable of passing, but at the same time, I think sometimes people say, if I fail the exam, that it somehow is a comment on who I am as a person or on the value I present to my clients, like that kind of thing. And I think sometimes people put some pressure on themselves when they say, I cannot fail the exam, or some language that effect. So again, I don't know if that's helpful or harmful, but I'm curious about your thoughts there, Suzanne.
It's certainly something I see quite often in my practice, that people are terrified of failure. And one of the concepts that I teach my clients is there really is there's no such thing as failure. There's only feedback. And what I mean by that is you're not going to fail ultimately if you get up, dust yourself off, and try again, right? You take the feedback, you look to say, well, what could I do differently when I write the exam again that I didn't do previously, right? And sometimes it's owning up to how you've prepared for the exam. And And it really is about, you know, perseverance and resiliency, right? That's something that, like you said, this isn't an exam where 100% of the people pass on the first round. But I think the individuals who really tie this back to, why am I doing this? Like, why am I embarking upon this? And you focus more on that why and how it's going to improve your life, how it's going to improve your clients' lives. You will dust yourself off, take the feedback that you need to take from what happened the first time round, and go at it again, right? And that's just something where I think resiliency to a large degree is a key that will make everyone on this call successful, whether they pass the exam the first round or not, right? I would encourage every one of you to focus on, I will pass, right? Versus the failure piece, but don't, emotionally beat yourself up. Yeah, the third time too, right? I mean, don't emotionally beat yourself up, but you really do need to take the feedback, right? Look at what you've done, look at what you haven't done. Look at candidates that have been successful, right? What did they do differently than what you've done? And implement that the next time, right? So it's about taking ownership for your success as well. I did see some things come through. Okay, so please clarify point 4. So is that isolating the actual stressor? Yes, okay. So when I talk about isolating what's actually stressing you out, what I'm referring to is, where's the actual threat for you? So this individual who, if we go back to the case study where I've said that their employer has actually put in place successfully completing the CFP as, a condition of their continued employment, the source of threat for that individual could be a loss of income. The source of threat for somebody else, may actually be to their reputation, right? And they're more worried about the failure to their reputation than they are about the failure to their income. So it's about really drilling down and focusing on, what exactly am I afraid of? Once you've understood and understand, what you're actually afraid of and where the source of stress is coming from, you're now in a better position to effectively rework your mindset around that. So for someone who has a fear, of, I'm going to lose my employment, therefore I'm going to lose my status within the community, therefore maybe I'm going to lose the love of, I might think I'm going to lose the love of my spouse or my children because of this. Their actual root fear is loss of love and not loss of employment. So that's really, with coaching, what I have to do is peel back the onion, right? And keep asking those questions until we get to what actually is the fear. Then we can address that faulty mindset and begin to embed, something more positive along the way. Does that make sense? Okay. And certainly I will leave my contact information. So for anyone who has more detailed questions after, please feel free to reach out. I said to Jason, part of this for me too is I want to give back, right? I was a massive stress ball at certain points in my career, to the point where, obviously there are impacts that happen to family and health and everything else, right? So if I can help reduce that for any of you, for all of you, would be amazing. But even just for one of you, that is my goal. My goal is to give back. So if we go to the next, were there any more questions? I think I saw something else pop up, but I'm not sure I can see. How far back we can go here, Jason?
You've got them all, Suzanne. You're good.
Okay, do it. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. So, oops, sorry. I think I've answered the questions. So if we go on to the next slide, here we go. So this is more blanket. So individually, what are some of the things that you can do, right? So what can you do to reduce your stress? As we talked about earlier, right? Really understand, what are you actually stressed about? Is it, I always say to my clients, procrastination and time management isn't actually the disease, it's the symptom, right? It's the coping mechanism or lack of coping mechanism in procrastinating that you're using to support the faulty belief that you may have about yourself. The other thing that I encourage you all, self-care, right? Stay hydrated, move your body, get lots of sleep, fuel your body in such a way that you're giving it proper nutrients, right? I'm not about saying you can't have junk food, but all I'm saying is that, we also know there are certain foods that support us and there are certain foods that don't. So try and focus on those as well. Number 3 is really do that brain dump, right? For anyone who has concerns around time management, 1,000% do that brain dump. Plan out your week and prioritize your week. If you're going into the week with a plan and a strategy in place, your week will move significantly smoother than if you're just winging it. I'm sure a lot of you plan for client sessions, right? Make sure that you're planning your CFP study time the same way you would plan your client sessions. Number 4 is really focus on, like I said, the outcome that you want to achieve. So it's focusing on passing the exam. Yeah, that's perfect. So Mike is saying, he handwrites his schedule the night prior. Mike, I'd encourage you to try planning out a week in advance if you can, right? Sometimes it helps to see an entire week and see where you can move some things around. If you find at work, you're not as efficient as perhaps what you used to be, if any of you have associates or individuals that can help in your office, you might want to look to delegate certain items to them if you're not doing that already, just so that way you can stay within the parameters that you have at work. Perfect. Yeah, Mike's saying he does a rough outline for the week and then just adjusts them. I think that's been something that has helped me immensely. Just even to keep me in control, right? And that's, the more in control I am, the easier it is for me to make adjustments. But if I constantly feel that someone else is structuring my day for me, that's going to stress me out too, right? So it's about keeping yourself really very much in control. And then the 5th one is, if you find you're struggling, working with a coaching professional to actually help you identify what those underlying thought processes and patterns that you have, right? So that individual can support you through that. Any other questions or concerns? If we go to the last slide, Jason, this is just really my contact information. Certainly you can find me on social media, right? Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I've also put my direct email address there. So my private email address, as well as my phone number. But certainly I'd be happy to take any questions that people may have.
I'll just throw in here, Suzanne, while people formulate questions, but I do want to echo a lot of what you talk about here, Suzanne, just basic things like hydration, right? These are things that we've always talked about in class. And certainly scheduling, we talked about that on day 1, although we didn't go into anywhere near this level of detail. But just in general, the value of coaching, and I know some of you on the call work with a manager or a trainer or whatever the case is, which fills that role sort of on the direct client facing stuff or the business development stuff. I think there's some real value there. You'll get to see what you're missing. It's very difficult for us to identify our own biases or our own blind spots, which of course hurts us on the exam as well. So just having that sort of second party or third party, whatever, to check in, you're going to expose things that you did not recognize on your own. Okay.
And I think that's such a valid, such a great point, Jason, because, um, even coaches have coaches, right? And it's not because we don't know everything, but it is sometimes really difficult to be your own cheerleader as well as, butt kicker, for lack of a better description, and to help guide you in a way that will make you as successful as you possibly can be, right?
Okay, perfect. And I agree with that, Mike, too. I'm a big fan of scheduled breaks, right? In fact, as you say that, I realize that I left that point out of my time management on the exam comments later on. So that's good. We'll make sure we address that. All right, any questions for Suzanne before we send her away? All right, perfect. That's a lot of ground you covered, Suzanne. Really appreciate it. Everybody, I'll have your contact information in the slide deck for today. And thanks very much. Again, let's give Suzanne a round of
Great week.
applause.
Best of luck if I'm not speaking with you later.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Okay, from there, let's roll right into some hardcore multiple choice. And I've got these questions are, the first two questions here, really based on the family law stuff that we did last week. So I'll give you a couple minutes to go through this. Siri set a timer for 90 seconds. Okay, that is our 90 seconds. So we've got about 2/3 of you who answered. And this is where we get into a little bit of a spousal support question. I actually don't know if this is a fair question. It might be too relevant to sort of typical family law practice versus maybe specific technical knowledge. That being said, I think it's common enough that this would fall into the range of what's examinable. So what's the goal of spousal support? What are we trying to accomplish when there's an award of spousal support? Yeah, it's a degree of equalization, and to, yeah, provide support to the lower income earner, perfect, and maintain that standard of living, right? To keep somebody accustomed or keep somebody in a lifestyle to which they become accustomed, right? That's the language there, Elizabeth. Okay. And that's it, Chica, right? A degree of self-sufficiency. So those are good answers. Perfect. So the answer here then, and we see a pretty diverse range of answers, actually. This is good. The answer, and I don't know if people have a technical reason for having chosen otherwise, but B is actually most likely the right answer here. There is a little bit of provincial variation in this, and there would be a little bit of case-by-case variation, but it really is going to be, for a small business owner like this, assuming the corporation is her sole source of income, which I guess I didn't specify in the case, but assuming the corporation is her sole source of income, really what would happen today when spousal support is being determined is we would look at the last 3 years of financials for that corporation, and that would most likely form the basis for your spousal support calculation or your spousal support in the separation agreement. So this is almost certainly going to be answer B. Okay, it probably is 2 or 3 years of corporate financial statements. Okay. Right, so that's much easier, Devin, if you're just taking T4 income, right? If you've got T4 income, then we're going to look at just, it might be 2 years notice of assessment. That would be just fine for a case like that. But for the business owner, that small business person, that's where you can't base that on T4 income, right? And you know this, you have clients, or you would deal with clients who have corporations that they use to defer tax, for example, right? Okay, so yeah, we're not going to force her into a certain type of compensation, although that's probably the net effect of this decision. Okay, personal gross income. This actually may not be true as well for a self-employed person. If you have a self-employed person, we might look at that person's set of expenses. It's true, but her intention is probably not relevant, Chica. Okay, the intention is probably not a concern to the courts. Okay, and really, honestly, I threw that in there as a red herring. I knew that that was going to trip folks up to some extent, but yeah, intention is not the question here. And this actually does cause problems for some folks, because what we see today with spousal support and child support orders is they are based more on your ability to earn income than on the income you actually earn. Okay. Now, child support can be adjusted after the fact. So if you were a tradesperson in Fort McMurray, for example, and you went through a job loss, you could go back to the courts and get your child support order adjusted, and you can do that every year. But your spousal support order would be much harder to adjust in a case like that. Yeah, so those retained earnings, Greg, those do show up in your net income, right? So if really what it was, just to boil this down a little bit further, if the corporation, and just for the sake of argument here, Greg, let's say the corporation did $800,000 of gross revenues. That's good. And it had expenses of, let's say, what are we going to do here? 600,000. Okay. So we have expenses of $600,000, which includes the 90,000 salary to Jessica. You with me here? And then we had taxes. So our taxes would be, in that case, depends on the province, but around $30,000, just for the sake of argument. And so then we have net income of 170,000. Okay, and from that she takes $60,000 of dividends. Well, that really leaves retained earnings still of 110, right? This is what you're asking about, Greg, right? Right, so that actually probably, and again, no 100% certainty here, but probably what happens here is the support payment calculations are likely based on, what's that going to be, $260,000 of annual income, not $150,000 of annual income. Okay. That uncertainty, Kevin, right? That uncertainty is a big motivating factor here. All right, that's all good? So you can only deduct court costs to the extent that you're incurring court costs to collect a taxable amount. Okay, so if you have court costs to collect spousal support, then you're going to be able to deduct that. But if it's for child support, then at least as far as I know here, Devin, if you've got some conflicting information, then you can't deduct that. But certainly what the Income Tax Act says is you could deduct court costs when it's to collect a taxable amount. So that would also apply to, let's say, severance. If you're going to court to collect severance, that's deductible, whereas damages would not be, because damages are typically not taxable, but severance would be. Okay. So if you actually did have, and you see this sometimes, employees who go to court against their former employers and they're awarded some court award, the courts will typically break down. They'll say this much is severance and this much is damages. Okay. No, so that's the point here, Baljit. No, a spousal support order, once your spousal support order is written, okay, so the spousal support is typically, it's a contract that's written at the time of separation. And unless the contract allows for some changes, then no. So this is the contract. Okay. Now, maybe she negotiates, maybe she makes some deal here where she does get a little bit of flexibility and that shows up in the contract, but that's entirely a negotiated outcome. With child support, I don't think the argument would fly here. Yeah, exactly, Elizabeth. There's a timeline in the contract and it will say whatever it is. It'll say she's paying spousal support at $60,000 a year for 7 years or something like that, right? Or it might be $60,000 a year for 7 years and then $30,000 a year for 3 more years. It might be cut in half or whatever the case is. Do you see until remarried in there? I don't ever see until remarried. I find, I think you'll find the courts, if they see an until remarried clause, will cut those off. I think you find that would be, okay. I could see if it's older, yes, then I could buy that. Well, that's the issue, Olu, that remarried, it's a public policy provision that we generally don't do things in contracts that would impair somebody from a normal behavior. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what happens. And yeah, that's some, I don't see that anymore, but if you've seen that in the past, that surprises me less. Yeah, with child support, Olu, for your, oh, that's so just in arrears, Tracy, and then maintenance enforcement caught up with the payer, that kind of thing. Nice, Kevin. That's some tax planning right there. Okay, interesting, Michelle. Are they newer? Oh, pension provisions. So I agree with pension provisions. That's a little different. Okay, that's not a question of the spousal support agreement, right? That's the agreement in the pension. And part of the challenge there is you're not dealing only with family law, right? You're also dealing with pension law in that case. So if was this, Michelle, a case where the new ex was going to become essentially a beneficiary of the pension itself? Was that the deal? So that person was going to be directly a beneficiary of the pension. I know you can do that with some pensions on marital breakdown. Oh, that's interesting. So not really, that's right in the agreement. That's still not your spousal support, but that is interesting. I think you would find that if she went to court to challenge those agreements, that she would have a pretty strong leg to stand on. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. So child support, yeah, this can be adjusted, but honestly, if you went to court, this was, Olu, was this your comment? Who made this? Oh, sorry, Baljeet. So if she went to court later on and said, I want to buy some machinery, so I'd like to reduce my child support, do you think that's going to fly? Yeah, that's not going to happen, right? The courts are not going to buy that argument. They're not going to say, oh, that's a good argument. You know, we think it's probably more important that you have machinery in your business than that your kids go to school. Okay. Oh, I'm getting an unstable internet warning here. So if I get punted, just wait on the call. I'll be back. Okay. There's like a 10 a.m. thing with Shaw. It hasn't happened in a while, but I find in the heat of summer, sometimes we get it. All right. Oh, I said, Serena, if I get punted from the call, just hang on. I'll be back. Okay. Right. But you have to go to court and explain why that happened, Baljeet. Okay. Now, let's say that her business is heavily dependent on consumer purchases, just for the sake of argument, and her income is way down this year because of COVID. Okay. If she goes to court and she says, I need my child support order reduced because my business revenues are way down because of COVID, that's a different case, right? And that argument is more likely to succeed. I'm not saying it will succeed. I'll just say it's more likely to succeed. Okay. I don't know if it makes sense. Is the child going to school? That's normally what you'll see with those agreements is they normally end at age 18 or 21 or 25 if the kid goes to school, something like that. But if the child is not going to school and really working and earning an income, no, that doesn't make sense to me, but it would be entirely dependent on the agreement. Okay. And you're not going to get that agreement changed now. Okay. Sounds like your client saw or wrote a bad or signed a bad agreement. Okay. Which they probably can't get changed now. Okay. All right. That's good. That exact situation, Olu, is one of the reasons we learn this in the financial planning curriculum, because at least you can be a sort of second opinion as to whether your client is getting maybe great service from their family lawyer. Okay. And I find it's very common in a separation that people don't want to spend any money and don't want to get good advice and do themselves a lot of harm because of that. Okay. And sometimes people don't have money. I get that. All right. Any questions there? Any other questions about this question? All right. Okay, let's go on to another question here. And same deal. Go ahead. Take your time on it. Take your 90 seconds, and then we'll have some answers. Okay, that's about 95 seconds. Okay, thanks for plugging in those answers. So that's all right, Mike. I don't know who hit what answer, but it's actually, this is a common enough thing that happens. I'm sure that for everybody writing a multiple choice exam, they misclick the answer at least 2 or 3 times in the course of writing the exam, which is particularly frustrating, right? So the concept here, anybody who's in Nova Scotia, sorry, I'm curious if the Nova Scotians had a hard time with this one. Why would I care if you're in Nova Scotia? No? Is there nobody in Nova Scotia on the call? So yeah, Nova Scotia has different rules. Oh, you're on private chat there, Craig. Yeah. So Nova Scotia actually has different rules. In Nova Scotia, the rule is that at the point of division of property, we don't look back to what you brought into the relationship. We look to everything you own. Okay. So neither number 1 nor number 2 would be true in Nova Scotia. It would be the entire value of the asset that would be brought into this discussion. Okay, so that's a little bit problematic. All right, but when you write the exam, the Nova Scotia folks are still writing the same exam as everybody else, and what's taught in the curricula is essentially the common rules. So even though this would not be true specifically in Nova Scotia, you would still have a valid question here. The question might even say something like, assume they are not in Nova Scotia, because it's the only province that has that restriction, I believe, if I remember correctly. Okay, there's a chart for that in chapter 5 of the advanced curriculum, if you want to see it, that shows all the particulars from one province to the next. So okay, So number one, this is normally the case. And this is really where a financial planner can have nice mic, can have a useful impact, okay? Because this is why we do a net worth statement at the beginning of a relationship. It's not the only reason, but it's a good reason to set everything up at the beginning of the relationship so we have a baseline later on in case the relationship ends. That's good. And this prevents somebody from having to jump in the time machine and go back 12 or 15 years or whatever when a relationship ends to figure out what they did own at that time. Now, number two is pretty much never the case, okay? That's not going to happen. I can't think of a scenario where that would be true. One interesting little twist here, however, and this is something I don't think you'd see on the exam, is that it's in about a third of provinces, what happens here is you only use the value at the end, Michelle? So the value at the end was left out? Oh, was it a business though, Michelle? Or was it a rental property? What was the asset in question? Interesting. What was the argument for leaving it out? That's interesting. Here, let me just check something. I have the BC rules handy here. Oh, okay. That's it, Michelle. Okay. That's a different story. Okay. The inheritance is different. Okay. So what was really left out there, Michelle, was your inheritance. Yeah. Not because it was a rental property, not even because it was owned before marriage, but because of the inheritance. Yeah. Which is something else that I could have included in the question here. That's another one where there's a difference by province, right? Saskatchewan does not protect inheritances, but other provinces do, at least to some extent. Although the common law in recent years has hammered at the value of inheritances. So it's less likely today that you keep an inheritance than it was maybe a decade ago. So anyways, in about a third of provinces, there would be a further question about growth between the date of separation and when the division of assets happens. Okay, so in Alberta, for example, we generally use the earliest date on which a court agreement, on which a formal agreement is created to determine the value of assets. That could be months or even years after the separation happens. So there's always a question, right? Yeah, both are left out, Devin. It's absolutely true. But the difference here would be, let's say that they got together in 2010, just for the sake of argument, and the rental was worth, let's say 300, I'll go 400,000 because I typed a 4, then they separate in 2020, and it's now worth $600,000. Okay, assuming it's not inherited as per Michelle's question. By the way, rental on the Gulf Islands, that's pretty cool, Michelle. The $200,000 of growth is a divisible asset. Okay, which honestly can be a real problem because that really means that in order to keep the rental property, David would have to be able to write a check for $100,000 or have some other asset that changes hands that's worth $100,000. Okay, that's good. Yeah, there'd have to be something else there, Chris, right? And that could be a fair bit of value. Okay. And your property, Michelle, would be an excellent example of that if you had not inherited it, right? That would be a good example of where there would be real dollars on the table that would be relevant to this. Okay. Only the growth though, right, Devin? So it's the growth that's divisible between the time that you got together and when you separated. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is the idea, is that David keeps this except in Nova Scotia. Okay. And yes, it's true to Michelle's point, if they're separating and he had inherited it, that'd be a different case, except in Saskatchewan. Yeah, that makes no difference, Baljeet. There is no protection for RSPs, TFSAs, for cash value of a life insurance policy, for seg funds. None of that is any different on the division of matrimonial property. Okay. Yeah, IPP is no different, Mike, right? All that stuff goes into the mix. Okay. Yeah, that's what I did here, Baljeet. That's exactly what I did here. Okay. It's true, Sanjay, right? Yeah, that's a much more difficult question, Melanie. And there's a reason you won't see that question on an exam, because that's actually not something that is explicitly addressed in most matrimonial property law. Okay. So if you read the Alberta Matrimonial Property Act, if I remember right, that's what it's called in Alberta. Very short. It's only really about 4 pages. Okay. And essentially, it just says this, that all this stuff is divided except what you brought in and inheritances. Okay. That's good. Makes no mention at all about debts, loans, liabilities, or any language like that. Hypothecations, as we see always in legislation. Okay. You would, Melanie. Okay, sorry, that's a different question, Baljeet. Let's come back. We'll talk about what would happen with the liability in a moment here, okay? My comment here is you wouldn't see it on the exam. So because what the Alberta legislation says, we're going to assume, and I'll ask you to hold any laughter here. The Alberta legislation says we're going to assume that these two separating adults are adults and are able to negotiate their position as adults. Okay, that's really the assumption. The Alberta legislation is not very prescriptive because it really leaves room to negotiate your position. Okay. So that's, I mean, I don't know what to tell you about that. It's ridiculous, isn't it? But that's what you get. I mean, there's some benefit to that too, because it does give more room for a whole bunch of different circumstances. So there is that upside, but yeah, I don't know. So yeah, this is in core in chapter 6 and advanced curriculum in chapter 5. Okay. Okay. Now, sure, for the sake of argument, let's say that this is exactly what it is. We got a $400,000 rental and they separate in 2020. So this is where if they took out, for the sake of argument, this is the more difficult scenario, they took out a line of credit together, okay, and that's really what it would have been. They took out a line of credit together in 2015 or a mortgage against the property, and they have $300,000 owing on that mortgage today. Okay, everybody with me here? Excuse me. Well, potentially, and this is difficult. I can't say definitively this would be the case, but your potential handling here is that really the net value of the asset for matrimonial property purposes would be negative $100,000. Because there's only $200,000 of asset value that shows up here, but there's a $300,000 liability. Now, this would be different if we had David had a $300,000 mortgage on the property in 2010, okay? Because then the net value of the asset that he brought in was only $100,000. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's all just math in the end, right? Everything that I've done here is just math. And then the question is, how strongly do the lawyers sort of stick to the math? Or how strongly really do David and Leanne want to stick to the math? Because you'll certainly see cases where people will negotiate away one asset for another for greater value, right? Has anybody seen that with the dog? I've seen this with the dog where somebody says, as long as I get the dog, I don't care about rights to his pension. Anybody see that one? Okay, that happens, Mal, right? That kind of thing. So, okay. So generally speaking, so when we have a marital breakdown in Canada, it's all no fault provisions, which means that we would say, even if it was due to a gambling problem, okay, that the debt is still a family debt. Okay, that's good. Now, potentially, and I actually know a case very close to that, Sue, where one of the parties sort of recognized their culpability in the marriage breakdown. Does that make sense? And they gave up some of their rights. So in the case I know of, it was a pension, and the one party had really had a bunch of behaviors that contributed to the marital breakdown. And when it got to separation, that person said, you know what, I don't want to sort of, like, I've already caused you enough difficulty here. I don't want to do any more. So I'm not going to go after your pension. So they sort of willfully left it out, but that wouldn't happen by default. So not normally. We're really strong on no fault provisions in Canada. Okay. So just 1 second, Olu. And yeah, so this is where, Devin, one of the things that you can do, and it's tough, right? But prenups, right? So prenups are one way to protect yourselves here. That's good. Separation of ownership, right? Well, you do the prenup before, right? So you anticipate that that kind of thing could happen. You do a prenup, you address those possibilities in the prenup. And then during the relationship, this is where I am generally a fan of a fairly strong degree of separation of ownership. It's not going to fix every problem, but if I have less householding of assets and more spouse A has this and spouse B has this, at least you get cleaner outcomes. But yes, that person is impoverishing the whole relationship. Evan, if they have an addictions issue or whatever the case is, right? That is really impoverishing the family unit. When you choose to get married, you are really hitching your wagon to that person in all kinds of ways, right? Financially, emotionally, whatever else. So you don't really have much that you can do about it. It's unfortunate. I'm actually helping somebody out right now who's in a case similar to that. She's, I don't want to say lucky because it's a terrible case, but in her case, she separated early enough that, and they didn't have a lot that they had jointly. So she separated early enough and there's not a lot of joint assets. And she was able to really free herself so that most of the debts he accumulated while he was going through his struggles are only in his hands. And then as it turns out, he died by suicide with all these debts, but they're not hers now. So really difficult, right? Okay. So Olu's comment here, I'm just going to copy your comment, Olu, just so we don't have to scroll way back up here. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not even sure if that's Manitoba or Ontario. They were married. Were they actually married, Olu? That would be a material question here. And this actually might be the inverse of Michelle's question. A lot of times when there's a farm in the family, the farm was inherited. So that might be the challenge here, Olu. Okay. And over the last 3 years, we haven't seen a ton of gain in the value of farms, right? Especially in Manitoba, most of that growth in the value of farms happened, I think, from about 2005 to about 2013 or 14. I can't remember when the pig thing happened the first time around in Manitoba, but I know that that's sort of the peak value of farms in Manitoba, right? Was just before the first bout of swine flu. So it sounds to me like might be a combination of inheritance and very little increase in value for the farm. Whereas, 3 years of doctoring, well, does she have retained earnings over that 3 years in the corp? Yeah, so that would be a difference, right? And I'm going to guess, like a lot of docs, that makes sense. Yeah. Like a lot of docs, she would have been the one doing most of the retained earnings, while the farmer would have been sort of spending, right? Okay. Yeah, exactly, Elizabeth, right? I know you see that with your clients, right? Okay, and Michelle's comment about income tax liability. So, right, I mean, nothing is fair, and that's almost never an argument we should look for, right? And even, Olu, remember what we talked about going way, way back to when I introduced the concept of a common law system, right? The point of a common law system is not to create fair outcomes, it's to create predictable outcomes. Okay. So, yeah, and this is a challenge. Michelle made this comment about income tax burdens. So section 160.4 of the Income Tax Act, to a large extent, allows CRA to really treat the couple as partners as it respects their tax liability. That can be quite difficult. Okay. Yeah, now actually, Kevin, so this year, the Federal Divorce Act is changing to make divorce a little bit easier again. Last time that happened was 1987. And it depends. So the separation agreements vary quite a bit by province. And yeah, there's quite a few provinces that could stand to update their marital property laws. Some of that changed in Alberta last year, where we now have a recognition of the end of common law relationships in our division of property law in Alberta. Okay. Yeah, I haven't given the answer yet. It's true, but it is B. Yes. So the answers here, 1 and 4 are correct. Okay. So your income earning potential does not get left out when you got together. It's only the value of assets. When we're now figuring out, this ties exactly back to what we saw in the last question. So the amount paid here in item 4, this is part of the household income. And it's really no different than the job you had when you got together. The income you have from the job you got together isn't left out, right? So if you were making $60,000 a year when you got married and you're making $80,000 a year now, the 60,000 is irrelevant. It's only the 80,000 that shows up in that calculation. Okay, that's all good? Okay. Any other questions about this question? Yeah, and that's what net rental income is, income less expense, Michelle. Yeah. Yeah, separating the assets is still matrimonial property. I'm not sure what else to tell you here, Baljeet. I don't know I guess what's not clear in my 400 to 600,000 example, Baljeet. I'm not sure what you're asking me here, sorry, or what the concern would be, or I don't know how to address that. I mean, I'm happy to answer a question, Baljeet. I'm not sure what to say. If you came into that relationship with a $400,000 asset and it's worth $600,000 when you separate, there's only 200,000 of value that's really divisible. Okay, that's really it. It's not something where we have to add a bunch of complexity to it. Okay. Well, if you can come up with a way to phrase a question, Baljeet, I'll happily answer it, right? Okay, now I wanted to take a few minutes here to talk about time management, and really just in the context of exam day. Okay. So this may not be exactly how you approach this, but it's time to start thinking about this. And we've really addressed this a little bit already. I've been giving you roughly 90 to 95 seconds to answer each of the questions I flash up on the screen. That's about when I put the polling up. And it's something that I think you should be thinking about as you're working through any content. So by now, even now, you should already have some idea about whether you're able to answer a certain type of question more quickly or more slowly or whatever it is. So I sort of laid out all of the, units or increments we might deal with in writing the exams. So whether it's just a straight up multiple choice question, or when you get to your CFP exam, how that's going to look. I do want to point out that for those that have written the CFP exam previously, the multiple choice component will be expanded. In fact, it was, I believe, in November as well. I'm just not sure that their communication on this was strong, but it is definitely going to be the case that compared to pre-November 2019 exams, you're going to have about 1.5 times as much multiple choice. And sorry, on the CFP exam, okay, and on the constructed response component, you're going to have about 75 to 80%. So what used to be 5 or 6 cases will now be 4 or 5 cases. Okay, I believe that's what you're going to experience. Obviously, I don't know exactly what's going to go into the exam, but the communication they have on their exam blueprint certainly indicates a shift in how this is done. Okay, that's good. Okay. Oh, Mike, so you mean, how am I supposed to phrase this now, Mike? You mean, should your feedback on your 4th attempt demonstrate that you're not passing that exam? I got to figure out my language around that. Is that what you're, the 4th fail, Mike? Is that what you're asking about? It's only the 4th where you have to go back and do stuff over again. Okay. You shouldn't have to complete IPE. You've got your capstone. You wrote the exam last year, right? Yeah, the PEP is the professional education program. So sorry, IPE, yes, not, I apologize, sorry. Yes, I agree about IPE, not PEP, sorry. Yes. But IPE is easy, okay? IPE, you'll blow through in no time at all. It's only 3 hours. The biggest problem is it costs whatever it is, $175, okay? But yeah, the IPE is not an issue. Yeah, I think there's more to that, Mike. Okay, that, at least my understanding here, Mike, and I'm pretty sure I have this right, is that you're only looking at that after a 4th attempt. Okay. All right. Have you done your capstone, Pamela? Okay, do they know you've done your capstone? So I don't see any reference to capstone in there. And that's where this does not match my understanding. Okay. I am tempted here, based on these conversations. Yeah, okay, I get that they have it on file, but that doesn't. Oh, that's good, Pamela. There you go. Okay, that's what I was expecting. Okay. Yeah, that's that 4th attempt thing, Tracy. If you get to the 4th attempt, then you have to really redo. Well, it depends where you started. This is such a nightmare. Okay, so if you did the QAFP exam, then that's still your locked in starting point. Okay. It's honestly, Mike, the problem is there's at least 7 or 8 different possible scenarios that have gotten people to where they are. And that's where these questions always make me a little bit nervous, because I'm answering the question that for you, Mike, and your situation is different than Pamela's, and Olu's situation is different than Tracy's. Yes, there are so many different scenarios here, okay? What really has to happen is you have to establish every fact, okay? And yes, and Tracy, when you do that, again, you want to have all your facts. When did you start the course? Did you do core? Did you do advanced curriculum? Did you do old core? Have you done IPE? What exam attempt are you on? Did you write the QAFP exam, or did you jump straight to CFP? Okay. Okay. Now, Ola, you did capstone too. So again, I think you'll find, Olu, you have the same comment that Pamela has. Okay. That you have that same thing. The capstone is supposed to give you exemption from PEP. Right. No, sorry, Olu, you're saying there's no need to do PEP now? Or you're saying, now I'm confused here, Olu, by your comment. But are you saying there will be a need to do PEP one day? So I do agree, if you fail your CFP exam a 4th time, yes, then you go back into the hopper. That I agree with. That's basically always been the rule, okay? The rule has always been, whether we're talking about 2007 or 2015 or today, that if you fail the exam, you're writing a 4th time, that you have to go back and redo all the courses that got you to that exam. Okay? That's good. That has always been true. All right. All good. Can we go back to time management here? Now, Baljeet, you mentioned sort of 2 to 3 minutes. I think that's not enough time, Baljeet, but again, you have to sort of figure it out, what works for you. But I think about 10 to 12 minutes to read a CFP case study is right. If you do it in less time, if you're getting good results, I'm okay with that. But be careful here that you're actually reading the case study well enough. Okay. Okay. So again, I don't care what this looks like for every individual. I care that you've thought about this. And I really believe that having a time management strategy on the exam is, while not a guarantee of success, a key indicator for success. Okay? There's nothing I can do that will guarantee success on the exam. But there are things we can do that improve our odds. Okay, so whatever it is you come up with, and I'll add Mike's comment from earlier here, and I do believe this is an important thing to take care of, is you schedule some breaks for yourself. Doesn't have to be a lot, might be something like 30 seconds every 20 minutes or something like that. Okay. And during that, or after every case study or whatever, but figure out some window where you're going to put down your pen, sit back in your desk, take a couple of breaths, stretch in place. That's it. Good. That will make a material difference. It allows you to retain focus on the exam, and it will keep you stronger for longer on the day of the exam. Okay. So again, I'm not suggesting that you have to answer the questions in order. I do think that's generally better. Or you might choose a certain type of question answer first. You might say, I'm going to do all the case study questions first or something like that. Fine, have a strategy. Okay. What I am concerned about here is sometimes people get too elaborate with these strategies. They say, I'm going to answer every, I don't know, RSP question first. And they spend 20 minutes going through the exam just looking for the RSP questions. That is a terrible use of your time. Okay. And another thing that I think is helpful is to set a time limit for each type of question. So if you look at a question and it leaves you completely clueless, and you say, whatever, I'm going to spend 60 seconds on it or 90 seconds on it or whatever, some amount of time before you acknowledge that no amount of time staring at this question is going to increase your chances of success. And then even at that point, you might have to say to yourself, okay, if I've spent a whole bunch of time on a question and I'm no closer to an answer, I have to move on. I had this discussion with somebody 2 days ago about an insurance needs analysis question that showed up on a recent exam, where that person said, I know how to do insurance needs analysis. And I looked at this question, I was 10 minutes into it, and I thought, oh, I've put in all this time, I've got to finish it now. And that person is still pretty confident they got the question wrong. That's a sunk cost issue. And at that point, it often becomes as much about your pride in your ability to answer that question as about passing the exam or anything else. You should only be writing the exam thinking about passing the exam. Okay. All right. Now, Mike said this earlier about writing this down the night before. I also think that what you need to do is from 9 a.m. until 9:03 a.m. on exam day, you take a piece of scrap paper or your exam booklet itself, and you write down your time management strategy. That's good. Is there any reason not to do that? Okay, perfect. How about we do one question, then we take a break? Are we okay with that? Or we'll at least get partway through one question, maybe? Let's see what happens here. Yeah, for accounting, I agree with that, Michelle. Here, I'm less concerned about that because you're not writing a formula intensive exam. But yes, that idea of just creating some control for yourself beforehand, I think is important. So it's a math question. We'll take another minute here. Okay, that's 2.5 minutes. That should be enough time to answer this question. I gave another minute here on account of the math. Not a ton of math here, but some that has to get done, right? How do we find that for time? Is that enough? Too much? What do you figure here? That should be another polling question, eh? Okay. Okay, yeah, that's fair. And honestly, that's for you to know, right? If my 2.5 minutes is not enough time, you say, Trevor, you say, whatever, I need 3 minutes to answer a non-time value of money math question. Good to go, right? As long as you know that, you're okay. I'm not suggesting that it should always be 2.5 minutes. Okay, everybody's with me there? I'm more concerned that you are aware of how your time is going to go than that you match up to some schedule that I have arbitrarily drawn up. Okay. That being said, now we're at about 5 minutes, which is quite a long time. We're at 4.5 minutes now. So, okay. All right. So if you're going to eliminate answers, Belgi, what would you eliminate here? Okay, that's fair. We know that's not correct, right? So this is a number 5 is not true. You won't know what your new RSP deduction limit is until January 1st, but you get your new RSP deduction limit, or sorry, you won't know what your limit is until you get your NOA, but you get that amount on January 1st, okay? So that gives us a correct answer, and that has to then eliminate everything with a 5 in it. That is absolutely true, okay? So we can eliminate B and D on that basis. That's good. That's a good start, Belgi. That just counts on you knowing your rules, right? That is a rule that you have to know. Okay, that's good. And I know it might seem, some of you might be saying, well, that's a pretty obscure rule, Jason, but in fact, it's quite material. And especially for somebody who's a member of a defined benefit pension plan. Because what this means, the reason this rule becomes important is, let's say I've got Michael on a PAC, just for the sake of argument, and in October, by October of last year, he was $5,000 of PAC into his RSP. Well, in November, that means he's going to be offside, assuming he packs $500 a month, just to use a figure here. So if he packs $500 a month, now he's offside. There you go, Greggy. All right, so he is offside now, right? And what's the problem with being offside here? We're now assuming he doesn't have his over-contribution allowance, okay? So assuming he has no over-contribution allowance, it's already used somewhere, okay? So what happens at this point with that $500 PAC? What's your penalty for going over? The 1%, right? 1% penalty. Now the bigger deal is having to do the T1 OVP, but really assuming he's over at this point, it's only going to cost him whatever, $5 in penalties, right? In November, okay? And then he would be offside again for his December contribution. So now by December, he's another $500 in, assuming he didn't fix this, that's $1,000 total. And we do that times 1%. It's another $10. And then in January, he gets his room back. Now, we won't know what that room is until he files a tax return, but January 1st, he's going to have room. He's going to be back on side. Okay, so really the penalties here are fairly insignificant. It would be $15 plus interest. And on January 1st, then it becomes only new interest until we get this sorted out. Okay, of course, if you came back in the last year and said, oh, I'm $1,000 over, I want to take those contributions back out, you can do that, but only if you caught that in the last year. All right, so now we're down to doing some math, right? Yeah, that's true, Baljit, yeah. He's still going to use this year's room though, Baljit. It still reduces his deduction limit. It'll just count against this year's deduction limit. Okay, so now we have to choose between 1 and 4 and 2 and 4. Now, did anybody actually just eyeball it and say, oh, I know what the difference between 1 and 2 is? What's the difference here between 1 and 2? Literally, what's the difference between the two? Okay, $600. So now this is a little bit of gamesmanship, and there's always some risk here. Okay, but I know that there's a $600 in the PA formula. Okay, that's it. Benefit entitlement times 9 minus 600 in that PA formula. So if I picked up on that, I will be okay. All right, let's take a coffee break there. We'll come back after a coffee break and we'll work through the PA formula for Michael. Just after I told Michelle that there's no formulas on this exam, right? Okay, yeah, we'll do it after the break together, Olu. All right, that's good. Okay, so I've got 2 minutes to the hour. We'll take a 15-minute break and we'll resume at 13 minutes past. Okay, we'll see you back then. Thanks.